started noticing that it felt different. Not necessarily bad, depending on who you ask, but different. Not quite the same as it had been. And since I, like a lot of people, have spent hundreds of hours reading, watching, and discussing this story, I tried to put my finger on what that difference was and how, if I may be so bold, it could potentially have been better. Welcome to How to Fix Game of Thrones, Season 7. As any good story sawbones knows, you need a diagnosis before you can start cutting. Because before we can fix the problems, we need to know what's caused them. Or who has caused them. Part 1. Character versus plot. Saying a story is driven either by character or plot is an oversimplification, but let's agree that a story can be focused more towards plot or towards character. By plot focus, I mean the external action is the major driving force, while character focus means the choices and development of the characters are central to what happens next.
Oh, no, Mr. Harris! Oh, my God! Don't touch me! Mr. Bob Harris!
So a character-focused story doesn't lack a plot, but it's less likely to be, the evil monsters are attacking, and more, my previous decisions have led me to this demise. So what focus does A Song of Ice and Fire have? Well, it's character, because George R.R. Martin is a true and tried gardener as opposed to a planner. He sows the seeds of the story and it grows before him. On the upside, this has led to some of the most memorable moments in fantasy history. On the downside, he's happy to let his characters get completely out of hand and spend years telling stories that he does not even really care about, solving problems by making the story even more complex, throwing more characters in, letting it get more convoluted and puzzling over the mirror and he's not for 17 years, even though most readers would be happy if he just blew up the pyramid and got on with it. Sure, that would not have been elegant, but we are willing to suspend a lot of disbelief if it's in the effort of making a better, more fun story. Which brings us to David Benioff and Dan Weiss, who are on the opposite side of the spectrum. They are great visual storytellers and thinkers who for years have acted as editors, carving away at Martin's massive work, picking the best pieces and sticking them together into a sequence that, sometimes, has a much stronger plot and momentum than the original. This balance between character and plot, between Martin and the Double Ds, has been one of the strongest features of HBO's Game of Thrones. And it's truly been an amazing adaptation, taking what was good about the original and enhancing it by playing to the strengths of its new medium. Then they caught up with the books. Granted, there were some missteps before then, but this split is undoubtedly a major turning point for the show, where suddenly, instead of getting to pick the best of roughly 2 million words, the writers only had some small bullet points and vague outlines to base their story on. And we know those outlines can't add up completely. There's going to be some fuzzy parts that need to be filled in, because otherwise George would have, actually finished it. So, it's just not going to be the same. It's going to become something different, something unspeakable. It's going to become Part 2. Television. Tons of people have said this, that Season 7 felt like an extremely well-made but ordinary fantasy television show. I think this is because it's leaning more towards plot, and character motivations, which used to be so central, bend this way and that based on whatever needs to happen. It's egregiously obvious in the build-up and climax of episodes 5 and 6, the part where so many viewers put their feet down and said, "We cannot suspend our disbelief any longer, this is ridiculous." The reason it feels ridiculous is that we've been trained for years in how this world works. It's been a story that delights in subverting expectations and going against the conventions of its own genre in a way that's just refreshing and different. Especially on TV, because there's a lot of innovative fantasy novels, but the same is not necessarily true for epic fantasy on television.
Why? What do you mean?
That's why Game of Thrones has often been described as a gateway into the genre. Fantasy for people who don't like fantasy, who don't want to see good, brave princes and heroes that always win. This stands a bit in contrast to Season 7, where there's good, brave princes and evil overlords and heroes that win the day a bit too often to be believable. Granted, we are coming up on the end of the story, and there's only so many ways it can go. I mean, if they cut off Dany's head in Episode 3, that wouldn't necessarily make the story better. And despite all my whining, I actually think Season 7 is quite good. It's just that there are so many details that could have easily been altered to make it all make a whole lot more sense and make it feel a lot more like Game of Thrones. And the first of those things is Part 3. Kill Bronn. Whoa, okay, don't turn off the video yet. Hear me out. I love him too, okay? Who doesn't? Just hear me out. The loot train attack is visually awesome, but there's no real price paid on either side. Essentially, nothing changes because of this sequence. Dany's still not flying in to take over King's Landing. Drogon doesn't really get hurt, neither does Jaime, Bronn, Tyrion, Dany, or even this guy. They even make sure to say all the gold gets into King's Landing, meaning that this blow is pretty insignificant in the war effort. Sure, we roast some Tarleys, but does anyone care? There's a couple of ways this sequence could have been more impactful, and the first is roasting Bronn alive, which I would do for three main reasons. First off, there's too many fake deaths. I really don't want to kill off characters just for the sake of it, but every fake-out death erodes at the feel of the show, the sense of danger they've so carefully constructed over the years, and in Season 7, there are simply too many. Bronn's been around for ages, adventuring with both Lannister brothers. He's a likable character, and his death would make it feel like the things happening had actual weight. Moreover, with his quips and easy manner, he represents the lighter side of Game of Thrones. His very presence often makes you feel like you're watching a fun romp, a buddy cop movie.
Just because I pay you for your services doesn't diminish our friendships. Enhances it, really.
Killing him would signal the end of that more light-hearted time in Game of Thrones history, which is really what we should be doing here, with just a few episodes to go until the fate of the world is decided. Bronn's death would not only